Daniel's first instinct was that he had found nepotism. That was the word that formed in his mind that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the county assessor record open on his laptop and the kitchen clock reading 11:47. Nepotism. A board member steering community contracts toward a family business. Ethically wrong. Potentially a violation of community rules. The kind of thing that, when exposed, gets a person removed from a volunteer board and generates several weeks of uncomfortable neighborhood gossip before everyone moves on. Serious. But not catastrophic. Not yet. He closed the laptop. Went to bed. Lay in the dark for a while listening to Karen's breathing and the slow rotation of the ceiling fan. He wasn't agitated. He wasn't rehearsing confrontations in his head. He was doing what he always does before a complex inspection, organizing the sequence. Deciding what he needed to look at next and in what order. He fell asleep before 1. The following morning, a Saturday, Daniel was at the kitchen table by 6:15. Coffee made. Notepad open. He had decided the night before that before he drew any conclusions about what Brad had done, he needed to understand precisely what the rules required. Not what he assumed they required. Not what seemed reasonable. What the actual governing language said, word for word, in the documents that controlled how Sycamore Ridge was legally operated. He started with the HOA's own charter. He had downloaded the full community charter weeks earlier but had focused primarily on the financial disclosure and inspection rights sections. Now he read it differently. Slower. With a highlighter open in his digital annotation tool and a legal pad beside the laptop for notes. He found the first relevant provision in Community Charter Section 4.2. He read it carefully. All contracts for services or materials exceeding $5,000 in total annual value shall require competitive bids from a minimum of 3 qualified vendors prior to board approval. The board shall maintain documentation of all bids received and the rationale for vendor selection. Daniel looked at his spreadsheet. Green Valley Groundskeeping had billed $4,950 per month. 12 months per year. That was $59,400 annually from the monthly maintenance invoices alone. Well above the $5,000 threshold. But each individual invoice was below $5,000. He sat with that for a moment. Then he kept reading. He moved to the Financial Policy Addendum. Section 7.8, which he already knew by memory. The Treasurer's unilateral approval authority for invoices under $5,000. He read the surrounding provisions he hadn't focused on before. The paragraphs on either side of 7.8, looking for any language that addressed cumulative vendor payments or annual contract totals. He found a subordinate clause in Section 7.11 that he had previously skimmed past. The per-invoice approval authority granted in Section 7.8 applies to individual operational disbursements and does not constitute authorization for ongoing vendor relationships. Any vendor engaged for recurring services on a monthly or seasonal basis shall be treated as a contracted service provider and subject to the full vendor approval requirements outlined in Charter Section 4.2 regardless of individual invoice amounts. Daniel read that paragraph 3 times. He underlined it on the legal pad. Then he wrote 2 words beneath it. No bids. There were no competitive bids on file. He knew this because the partial records the management office had sent him included a vendor approval log, a simple table listing contracts reviewed by the board with dates and vote outcomes. Green Valley Groundskeeping did not appear in that log. Not once. Not in any of the 4 years Daniel had payment records for. A vendor that had received $261,000 in community funds had never been put out to competitive bid, had never received a formal board vote, and had never appeared in any approval documentation whatsoever. But it was what Daniel found next that fundamentally changed the nature of what he was looking at. He had been treating this as a policy violation. A procedural failure. The kind of finding that results in a board censure, a policy correction, and perhaps a demand for repayment. Serious. But civil. Administrative. Then he found the statute. Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 10, governing nonprofit corporations. The HOA was organized as a nonprofit under Arizona law. Daniel pulled the relevant sections on a state government website, the text dense and formatted in the particular way of legislative language, precise, dry, and utterly without ambiguity once you understood how to read it. He found the conflict of interest provisions. He read them slowly, moving his finger along the screen the way he moves it along structural drawings when checking load calculations. The statute required the following. Any transaction in which a board director had a direct or indirect financial interest, including transactions involving businesses owned or controlled by a director's immediate family members, constituted an interested party transaction. For such a transaction to be valid and legally protected, 3 conditions had to be met. Condition 1. The material facts of the director's interest in the transaction had to be disclosed to the full board prior to authorization. Condition 2. The interested director had to recuse themselves from the vote authorizing the transaction. Condition 3. The remaining board members, after full disclosure and recusal, had to affirmatively approve the transaction by a sufficient majority. Daniel set the laptop aside. He picked up the board approval log the management office had sent. He went through it page by page. Every entry. Every vote recorded. Every contract reviewed. He was looking for any entry connected to Green Valley Groundskeeping LLC. Any disclosure of a conflict of interest. Any recusal notation beside Brad Kessler's name. Any vote conducted in Brad's absence. There was nothing. Not a single entry. Not a disclosure form. Not a recusal record. Not a vote. Not one document indicating that the board had ever been told that the vendor receiving the largest single share of the community's annual landscaping budget was a company registered to the treasurer's wife. Daniel sat back. He picked up his coffee cup. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway, looking out the kitchen window at the quiet Saturday morning street. A neighbor was walking a dog. 2 houses down, someone was backing a car out of a garage. The ordinary texture of a weekend in a subdivision where most people trusted that their association fees were being handled responsibly by volunteers who cared about the community. He set the cup down. He understood now that this was not nepotism. Nepotism is preferential treatment. It exists in a gray zone where relationships create advantage but the underlying conduct remains technically defensible. What Daniel had found was categorically different. Under Arizona nonprofit law, Brad had been legally required to disclose his family's financial interest in Green Valley before a single dollar was approved. The failure to disclose didn't just make the transactions ethically questionable. It made them legally void from the moment they were authorized. He opened a new page in his legal pad and wrote the word, exposure. Beneath it he wrote, personal liability. Because the statute did not merely invalidate undisclosed interested transactions. It also addressed the question of director protection. Arizona nonprofit law extended what is commonly called the business judgment rule to board directors, a legal protection that shields volunteer officers from personal liability for good faith business decisions, even ones that turn out badly. That protection, Daniel read carefully, did not apply when the director had a material undisclosed conflict of interest in the transaction. He wrote that down in full. Business judgment protection does not apply to interested transactions where conflict was not disclosed. He stared at that line for a moment. Then a secondary question occurred to him. One that he hadn't thought to examine yet. He went back to the partial financial records and looked for references to the HOA's insurance carrier. He found a line item in the administrative expenses section for directors and officers' liability insurance, a standard policy that most HOAs carry to protect board members from personal legal exposure arising from their governance decisions. He wrote down the carrier name. It took him 40 minutes to find a copy of the policy summary in the HOA's archived document folder on their website. It had been uploaded 3 years earlier and appeared to have been accessed rarely, if ever, given its position buried beneath outdated meeting minutes and an old pool renovation proposal. He downloaded it. He opened it. He went directly to the exclusions section. Insurance policies are written to protect against mistakes. Against oversights. Against reasonable decisions made in good faith that nonetheless result in harm. They are not written to protect against deliberate misconduct. Every policy that covers directors and officers contains exclusions, categories of conduct for which the insurer will not pay defense costs, will not cover settlements, will not provide any protection whatsoever. Daniel read the exclusions list. He moved through them one by one. And then he stopped. This policy does not provide coverage for any claim arising out of, based upon, or attributable to any deliberately fraudulent act or omission, any willful violation of any statute or regulation, any act of self-dealing, personal enrichment, or intentional misconduct by an insured person, or any transaction in which an insured person gained a personal profit or financial advantage to which they were not legally entitled. Daniel read that paragraph twice. Then he read it a third time. Self-dealing. Personal enrichment. Intentional misconduct. He set the policy document down beside his legal pad. He looked at what he had assembled on the table. The spreadsheet showing 4 years of payments. The board approval log with no Green Valley entries. The Arizona statute requiring disclosure that never happened. The county assessor record tying the vendor directly to Brad's home address. And now this. Brad had likely assumed, the way people who believe they are untouchable always assume, that if anyone ever found out, the HOA's insurance policy would cover his legal defense. That the organization would absorb the cost of any dispute. That the community's resources would shield him from the personal consequences of what he had done. He had not read his own insurance policy carefully enough. Because if what Daniel had documented was accurate, and every document in front of him indicated that it was, then the moment Brad's conduct was characterized as self-dealing and personal enrichment, which it would be, which it legally had to be given the undisclosed conflict and the scale of the payments, the insurance carrier would deny coverage. Every dollar of legal defense. Every settlement obligation. Every judgment entered against him. Brad would not be protected by the community he had spent 6 years controlling. He would be standing in front of it. Alone. Personally exposed. His house. His savings. His retirement. Everything. December arrived in Phoenix the way it always does. Not with snow. Not with the dramatic seasonal shift that marks winter in other parts of the country. Just a quiet cooling of the air. Mornings dropping into the high 40s. The light going flat and pale by 4 in the afternoon. Residents closing their windows at night for the first time in months, the neighborhood settling into the particular stillness of a desert suburb in the short days before the holidays. Daniel Mercer noticed none of it. He was working. Not at his job, though he did that too, arriving before sunrise, reviewing permits, conducting inspections, eating lunch at his desk the way he always did. But in the hours between dinner and midnight, at the kitchen table under the overhead light while Karen graded papers or read in the other room, Daniel was building something that had no name yet. Not an accusation. Not a complaint. A structure. Chronological. Cross-referenced. Source to original documents at every point. The kind of thing that doesn't announce itself until it's complete. In the second week of December, a new piece of HOA correspondence arrived in his mailbox. Not a violation notice this time. A meeting announcement. The Sycamore Ridge Homeowners Association Annual Budget Review and Planning Notice. Printed on the standard pale green letterhead. Dated. Signed at the bottom by Bradley Kessler, HOA Treasurer. Daniel read it at the end of the driveway, standing in the early evening cool with his keys in his hand. The notice announced that the board had completed its preliminary budget review for the upcoming fiscal year and was presenting the proposed budget to homeowners for community input prior to the annual membership meeting scheduled for the following spring. Attached behind the notice was a 2-page budget summary. Daniel unfolded it. He found the landscaping section. Green Valley Groundskeeping LLC. Listed again as the primary landscaping vendor. Monthly service rate for the upcoming year, $5,100. Not $4,950. $5,100. He read that number twice. For 4 years, every single monthly invoice from Green Valley had been carefully, deliberately positioned below the $5,000 approval threshold. Now, apparently, Brad had decided to raise the rate. Either he had grown careless, or he had grown so confident in his position that he no longer felt the threshold mattered. Or both. Daniel folded the budget summary. He put it in his jacket pocket. He walked inside. He added it to the Sycamore Ridge binder without a word. That same week, Daniel attended the neighborhood holiday gathering that a family 3 streets over hosted every year in their cul-de-sac. He went because Karen wanted to go. He stood near the edge of the gathering with a cup of cider, speaking to neighbors he recognized but didn't know well, listening more than talking the way he generally preferred. He heard Brad before he saw him. Brad Kessler had the kind of voice that filled a space without seeming to try. A practiced conversational authority developed over decades of running a company, managing employees, negotiating contracts. At 62, he was broad-shouldered and well-dressed in the specific way of a man who had always made comfortable money and considered his appearance part of his professional identity. Even in a casual neighborhood gathering. Even in December, standing in a cul-de-sac under string lights, holding a bottle of beer. Daniel observed him from across the gathering. Brad was speaking to a cluster of homeowners near the food table. His posture was relaxed. His gestures were expansive. He was laughing at something he himself had just said. Daniel could not hear the specific words from where he stood. But he could read the body language without difficulty. This was a man who felt completely in control of his environment. A man who had weathered several months of homeowner questions and mild friction and had emerged, as far as he could tell, without consequence. The questions had stopped. The violation notices had produced payment. The records request had been answered with partial documents that revealed nothing obviously damning to an untrained reader. As far as Brad Kessler was concerned, the situation had resolved itself. He had no way of knowing that the man standing 40 feet away, drinking cider quietly near the edge of the gathering, had spent the past 8 months building a forensic record of everything he had done. Daniel left the gathering at 8:15. He drove home. Went inside. Sat down at the kitchen table. He opened his laptop. He kept working. In January, additional financial documents arrived. Not because Brad had released them willingly. Daniel had submitted one final records request in late November, this time through certified mail with return receipt confirmation, citing Section 9.3 and including a formal note that he was preserving all correspondence as part of an ongoing documentation process. The wording was careful. It implied without stating that the request was part of something larger. 11 days later, a USB drive arrived from the management office containing scanned copies of vendor invoices going back 5 years. Daniel plugged it in on a Tuesday evening. He opened the first folder. Green Valley Groundskeeping. Inside were 61 individual invoice scans. He opened them one by one. Examined each one. Not just for the amount. He already had most of the payment totals from the vendor ledger, but for the document itself. The formatting. The layout. The font. The invoice number sequence. The language used to describe the services billed. What he found was more significant than he had anticipated. Every single invoice across all 5 years was formatted identically. The same header layout. The same font, a common sans serif, but set in the same size and weight with the same margin spacing throughout. The same line item descriptions, repeated with minor variations. The same rounded billing amounts. And in the lower right corner of every document, in small text beneath the total, the same notation. Services rendered per community agreement. No agreement number referenced. No scope of work attached. No itemized labor or material breakdown. No crew size. No hours logged. No equipment used. Just that phrase. Services rendered per community agreement. 61 times. Across 5 years. From a company with no visible operational history, no equipment records, no public business presence of any kind. And then he noticed something else. On the invoice dated 14 months into the vendor relationship, month 14, in the second year of payments, there was a small typographical error in the company name. The word groundskeeping had been spelled groundskeeping. A transposed letter. Minor. The kind of error that gets introduced when someone is typing quickly and doesn't proofread carefully. Daniel went to the next invoice. Same typo. He went to the one after that. Same typo. He worked forward through the remaining invoices, checking the header on each one. The typo appeared on every invoice from month 14 through month 61. 48 consecutive invoices. The same transposed letter. The same error. Never corrected. A legitimate landscaping company billing a client nearly $60,000 a year would have, at some point across 4 years, noticed a typo in its own company name and corrected it. A letterhead gets updated. A template gets revised. An office manager catches it. Unless the invoices were not being generated by a company with an office manager. Unless they were being generated by a single person, working from a single document template, who had introduced the error and then simply continued producing copies of the same file month after month without ever reviewing it. Daniel added a column to his master spreadsheet. He labeled it, typo present. He marked it yes or no for each invoice. Then he sat back and looked at the full spreadsheet for the first time as a complete document. 5 years of data. 61 invoice entries. Payment amounts. Dates. Check numbers where available. Project billing line items in year 4 and 5. Market rate variance calculations. The typo column. The threshold pattern column tracking how many invoices fell below $5,000. He selected the payment amount column and ran a sum formula at the bottom. The number populated in the cell. He looked at it. He checked the formula. He ran it again. $213,450. Not the rough figure he had estimated earlier in his investigation, working from incomplete records. The precise total, derived from the actual invoice documents, cross-referenced against the payment ledger, covering the full scope of what Green Valley Groundskeeping LLC had billed Sycamore Ridge over 5 fiscal years. $213,000. Paid in installments of $4,950. Month after month. Year after year. Always just below the line. Always approved by the same man. Always to a company registered to that same man's wife. Always for work that, in a growing number of documented cases, the physical evidence suggested had never been performed. Daniel saved the spreadsheet. He backed it up to an external drive. He backed it up a second time to a secure cloud account he had created specifically for this purpose using an email address not connected to his primary identity. He printed 2 copies. Placed one in the Sycamore Ridge binder. Sealed the second copy in an envelope and put it in the filing cabinet in his home office, behind a folder labeled Tax Documents 2019. He looked at the clock. 11:53. Karen had been asleep for 2 hours. The house was completely quiet. Outside, the December air was cold enough now that the neighborhood had gone fully still. No sprinklers. No distant traffic. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the low sound of the heating system cycling on for the first time that night, warm air moving softly through the vents. Daniel closed the laptop. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment in the quiet dark. Then he picked up his pen and wrote one line at the bottom of his legal pad. $213,450. 58 payments. 56 of them. Exactly $4,950. He underlined it once. Set the pen down. Turned off the kitchen light. And went to bed. The Sycamore Ridge annual homeowners meeting was held on the second Thursday of March at the Community Recreation Center on the eastern edge of the development. It was a room Daniel had been in exactly twice before in 14 years of living in this neighborhood. Fluorescent overhead lighting. Folding chairs arranged in rows facing a portable presentation table. A pull-down projector screen at the front. The kind of room that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee and was used 11 months out of the year for nothing in particular. Tonight, 140 homeowners had shown up. That was more than 3 times the typical attendance. Word had moved through the neighborhood quietly over the preceding weeks. Not through any organized campaign. Not through social media posts or flyers. Through the particular mechanism by which information travels in a residential community when people sense, without being able to articulate exactly why, that something is about to happen. Daniel arrived 18 minutes early. He was carrying a canvas bag. Inside the bag were 14 identical 3-ring binders. Black. Standard office supply store. Each one labeled on the spine with a single line of text, Sycamore Ridge Financial Review, supporting documentation. He set the bag on a chair in the second row and sat down beside it. He did not speak to anyone. He did not distribute anything. He sat with his hands folded on his lap and waited. Brad Kessler arrived 12 minutes later. He came through the side entrance near the presentation table, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who had run this meeting for 6 consecutive years. He was wearing a collared shirt, pressed. His reading glasses were on top of his head. He was speaking to the board secretary as he walked, something about the agenda order, gesturing with a manila folder. He set up his materials at the presentation table without looking at the room. He did not notice the canvas bag. He did not notice Daniel. The meeting was called to order at 7 o'clock. The board secretary read through procedural items. Previous meeting minutes approved. Committee updates acknowledged. Then Brad stood up and moved to the front of the room, and the meeting arrived at its primary agenda item, the annual budget presentation. He spoke for 11 minutes. Daniel timed it. Brad walked the room through the budget line by line with the practiced fluency of someone who had delivered this presentation enough times that it had become automatic. Insurance. Pool maintenance. Administrative costs. Reserve contributions. He used the word transparency twice. He used the phrase community investment 4 times. His tone was cordial and authoritative in equal measure, the tone of a man who expected to be listened to and generally was. He reached the landscaping section. He cited the Green Valley groundskeeping contract. He described the rate adjustment for the upcoming year as a reflection of market conditions and inflationary pressures. He recommended the board approve the proposed budget as presented. Then he asked if there were any questions from the floor. Daniel stood up. He did not raise his hand first. He simply stood, in the second row, and when Brad's eyes moved to him with the particular expression of a man who has just registered an unexpected variable, Daniel spoke calmly. I'd like to request recognition under Section 9.3 to present financial documentation to the homeowners in attendance before the budget vote is conducted. Brad held his expression for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. The controlled smile of a man recalibrating in real time. Daniel. Sure. Homeowners always have the floor at annual meetings. He gestured toward the room as if granting a courtesy. Daniel reached into the canvas bag. He passed binders down each row without hurry, the way a person distributes handouts at a professional meeting. People took them without fully understanding yet what they were holding. There was a low rustling of chairs, a murmur of quiet exchanges. The sound of 140 people opening 3 binders simultaneously, a dry, collective crinkle of plastic and paper that settled into silence as the room began to read the first page. Daniel walked to the front. He stood beside the projector screen, not behind the presentation table where Brad had stood. He did not use slides. He spoke to the documents. Tab 1, he said. Arizona Corporation Commission Registration for Green Valley Groundskeeping LLC. Please direct your attention to the registered agent field. The room was quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional soft turn of a binder page as people found the document. Daniel waited until the room had stilled completely. Then he read it aloud. Registered agent, Melissa Kessler. Residence address, 4401 Sunrise Terrace, Phoenix, Arizona. He let that sit for 4 full seconds. That address is 3 streets from this building. It is the primary residence of Bradley and Melissa Kessler. The vendor that has received the largest single share of this community's landscaping budget for 5 consecutive years is registered to the HOA treasurer's wife. He heard a chair shift somewhere in the back of the room. A low sound, not quite a word, from somewhere in the middle rose. Then silence again. Brad, at the presentation table, had not moved. His face had not changed significantly. But something behind his eyes had shifted. A very slight recalibration. The look of a man who had just understood that this was not a routine floor question. Tab 2, Daniel said. Board approval logs for vendor contracts, fiscal years 1 through 5. Please locate any entry authorizing Green Valley Groundskeeping as a contracted service provider. He waited. Pages turned. Then stopped turning. Because there was no entry to find. There is no disclosure of conflict, Daniel said. No recusal by the treasurer. No board vote. No competitive bid documentation as required by Charter Section 4.2. The contract is absent from every approval log across the entirety of the vendor relationship. He moved to tab 3 without pausing. Payment history. 5 fiscal years. 61 invoices. Please look at the amount column. He gave the room 30 seconds to scan the spreadsheet. 56 of those 61 invoices are for an identical amount. $4,950. The HOA's Financial Policy Section 7.8 grants the Treasurer unilateral approval authority for invoices below $5,000. The recurring billing pattern you are looking at did not occur by coincidence. Somewhere in the third row, a woman said something quietly to the person beside her. Daniel did not look in her direction. He kept his eyes moving calmly across the room, the way he looks across a construction site when he's assessing the full scope before noting specific violations. Tab 4, he said. Photographs and satellite imagery. He walked through them one by one. The tree replacement invoiced in year 4 along the north entry corridor. He had printed an aerial image from a publicly available satellite archive showing the same tree canopy before and after the billing date. No change. The irrigation repair invoiced for the West Common area. He had photographed the original equipment fittings, unmodified, with date stamps. The retaining wall maintenance billed in year 5. He had printed photographs of the wall surface taken 1 week before the invoice date and 1 month after. Identical weathering. No sealant. No patching. He did not editorialize. He simply described what each photograph showed and what the corresponding invoice claimed. The room had gone very quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a presentation to end. A different kind of quiet. The particular stillness of a large group of people processing information that is reorganizing their understanding of something they thought they already knew. Tab 5, Daniel said. Internal board correspondence. He read it aloud. The full sentence. Slowly. People questioning financial operations need reminders that compliance matters. He set the page down. This email was sent by the HOA treasurer 11 days before my third violation notice was issued. Copies are included in the tab. The dates are highlighted. He looked up. He looked directly at Brad for the first time since standing. Brad was sitting at the presentation table with both hands flat on its surface, very still, the way a person sits when every instinct is telling them not to move. The manila folder was still in front of him. His reading glasses were still on top of his head. His expression was controlled. But the ease that had been in his posture 20 minutes earlier, the practiced authority of a man fully in possession of the room, was gone. Daniel returned his eyes to the homeowners. I am not making a legal determination tonight, he said. I am a building inspector. I read documents. These are the documents. I would ask that the board defer the budget vote until an independent financial review has been conducted. He walked back to his seat. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then a voice came from the far corner of the room. A man Daniel recognized as the HOA attorney, joining the meeting remotely on a laptop that had been positioned on a side table near the wall, its camera angled toward the room. The attorney's voice was flat and careful in the particular way of a professional who has just heard something that requires an immediate response and is choosing each word with precision. He said 4 words. Do not approve this budget. The room held its breath. At the presentation table, Bradley Kessler, HOA treasurer, 6-year board veteran, the man who had run this meeting every single year since anyone in this room could remember, sat with his hands flat on the table and his reading glasses on his head and his manila folder in front of him. And for the first time in 6 years, he had nothing to say. The meeting did not end dramatically. That is the first thing worth understanding about what happened after the attorney spoke those 4 words into the laptop camera from wherever he was sitting, an office somewhere, a home study, a conference room. Wherever he was, his voice had come through the small speaker with the flat, careful precision of a professional who understood exactly what he had just heard and exactly what it required. Do not approve this budget. The board president, a soft-spoken woman named Carla Whitfield who had served for 2 years and who, by every indication, had known nothing about the arrangement between Brad and Green Valley, called for an immediate recess. She did not look at Brad when she said it. She looked at the table in front of her and spoke in a measured voice and asked everyone to please remain calm and give the board a few minutes to consult with legal counsel privately. People stood. Chairs scraped back against the carpet. A low murmur moved through the room the way it does when a large group of people are all trying to process the same information simultaneously and none of them have quite finished. Daniel sat in his chair. He did not move. He did not speak to anyone. He waited. Brad left through the side entrance. He walked past the rows of seated and standing homeowners with his manila folder under his arm and his reading glasses still on his head, moving at a pace that was neither hurried nor casual but something precisely between the two. The pace of a man executing a decision he had made in the previous 30 seconds. He did not look at Daniel as he passed. The side door closed behind him. Daniel watched it close. Then he picked up his canvas bag, which still held 2 spare binders he hadn't needed to distribute, and he set it on the floor beside his feet. He waited for the meeting to resume. It reconvened 19 minutes later. Carla Whitfield returned to the front of the room and announced, in the same measured voice, that the board was tabling all budget votes pending an independent financial review. She stated that the board took the information presented that evening seriously and that homeowners would be notified of next steps in writing within 10 business days. She thanked everyone for attending. She adjourned the meeting. Daniel drove home. He made a cup of tea. Sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet house. Karen had stayed home that evening, a mild headache, and was already in bed. He sat alone in the kitchen under the overhead light, the neighborhood completely still outside, and he drank his tea and did not think about anything in particular. Then he went to bed. The letter arrived from the board 14 days later. It was longer than 2 pages. It informed Sycamore Ridge homeowners that the board had engaged an independent forensic accounting firm to conduct a comprehensive review of HOA financial records for the preceding 5 fiscal years. It stated that this review was being conducted as a matter of fiduciary responsibility. It did not name Brad. It did not use the words fraud or misconduct. It used the phrase financial irregularities twice and the phrase enhanced oversight 3 times. Daniel filed it in the Sycamore Ridge binder. The forensic audit took 11 weeks. The firm had full access to banking records, original invoices, vendor contracts, board communications, and payment authorization documents. They worked from source material, not summaries. They verified each payment against bank statements. They cross-referenced vendor invoices against comparable market contracts. They documented every instance where required approval procedures had not been followed. Their report was 43 pages. Daniel received a summary copy mailed to all homeowners in good standing. He sat at the kitchen table and read it the same way he read everything, line by line, with a pen, from the beginning. The executive summary stated the following. Our review identified a total of $213,450 in payments made to Green Valley Groundskeeping LLC across fiscal years 1 through 5 that do not conform to the association's vendor approval requirements, conflict of interest disclosure obligations, or competitive bidding provisions as outlined in the governing documents and applicable Arizona nonprofit statute. Additionally, our review identified 8 project invoices totaling $31,200 for which supporting documentation of work performed could not be located and for which physical verification of completed work was not possible. $213,000. The exact number Daniel had calculated at his kitchen table at 11:53 on a December night, alone, working from scanned invoices and a spreadsheet formula. He underlined it. He set down his pen. Within 30 days of the audit report, the board convened a special session. 2 resolutions were passed. The first formally removed Bradley Kessler from his position as HOA treasurer, effective immediately, citing breach of fiduciary duty and failure to comply with conflict of interest disclosure requirements under the Community Charter and Arizona Nonprofit Statute. The second removed him from the board entirely. Brad's attorney sent a letter to the board contesting the removal on procedural grounds. The board's attorney responded. The exchange lasted 3 weeks and resolved in the board's favor without escalation to litigation. Brad paid his attorney personally. Because 2 weeks after the forensic audit report was delivered to the board, the HOA's directors and officers' insurance carrier had sent its own correspondence. Daniel was not privy to the original letter. But the board's summary communication to homeowners described it in plain terms. The carrier had reviewed the audit findings and determined that the conduct in question fell within the policy's exclusion provisions for self-dealing, personal enrichment, and intentional misconduct. Accordingly, the carrier was declining to provide defense coverage or indemnification in connection with any claims arising from the identified transactions. The policy Brad had assumed would protect him had a clause he had never read carefully enough. And now he was standing on the other side of it. Alone. The HOA filed a civil lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court in late spring. The claims listed in the filing were breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent concealment, and unjust enrichment. The lawsuit named Bradley Kessler individually. Not the HOA management company. Not the board as a collective entity. Bradley Kessler. Personally. In the autumn of that same year, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation following a formal referral from the forensic accounting firm. The investigation was quiet. It generated no press coverage of note. It proceeded the way these proceedings generally do, slowly, with long silences between developments that feel, from the outside, like nothing is happening. Something was happening. 18 months after the annual meeting where Daniel had distributed 14 black binders to a room of 140 homeowners, a settlement agreement was reached in the civil matter. Daniel received the homeowner notification letter on a Tuesday morning. He read it at the kitchen counter before work, boots already on, coffee in hand. The letter stated that the HOA had reached a resolution with Bradley Kessler that included a structured repayment agreement, a personal civil judgment entered against him, and a permanent prohibition from serving in any leadership or fiduciary capacity within the Sycamore Ridge HOA or its successor organizations. As part of the asset liquidation required to fund the repayment schedule, Kessler had sold a vacation property. Daniel set the letter down. He finished his coffee. He picked up his keys. He went to work. By the following fiscal year, Sycamore Ridge had implemented a new financial oversight structure. An independent audit committee composed of 3 homeowners with financial or accounting backgrounds. A requirement for dual signatures on all disbursements above $2,000. A mandatory annual third-party review of all vendor relationships. The annual dues decreased for the first time in 7 years. Not dramatically. $210 per household. But downward, for the first time, in 7 years. Daniel received no formal recognition. No letter from the board. No acknowledgement at a community meeting. No mention in the homeowner newsletter beyond the same language sent to every resident. He had not sought any of those things and would not have welcomed them if offered. He was not a hero in this story. He was a building inspector who understood invoices and had a filing cabinet and enough patience to wait until he had everything before he said anything. His mornings returned to what they had always been. Alarm at 5:15. Coffee made automatically because he set the timer the night before. Local news playing softly from the cabinet television. Work boots by the garage door. The same 7-year-old Toyota Camry in the driveway. Karen's third graders still learning to read in a classroom 11 minutes away. The quiet structure of a life built around ordinary things done consistently. On Saturday afternoons, he still grilled in the backyard. The neighbors still waved from across the fence. He still didn't know most of their names. Some evenings, walking the perimeter of Sycamore Ridge the way he occasionally did for no particular reason, Daniel would pass the main entrance. The small fountain running. The landscaping along the entry corridor looking the same as it always had. Trimmed. Green. Maintained. He would look at it for a moment. Then he would keep walking. Because here is the thing that stayed with him. The thing that he turned over occasionally in the quiet of the kitchen at night, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the particular detachment of a man who processes information the way other people breathe. Green Valley Groundskeeping LLC had submitted its final invoice to Sycamore Ridge on the same day Brad Kessler had walked out the side door of the Community Recreation Center with his manila folder under his arm. After that evening, no further invoices arrived. No cancellation notice. No final accounting. No forwarding address. The company simply stopped billing. As if it had never existed as anything more than a name on a document and a number on a ledger. The HOA engaged a legitimate landscaping contractor the following month. A local company with a website, equipment photos, customer reviews, and a registered business address at a physical location that housed an actual office. Their annual contract came in at $41,000. Reviewed by 3 board members. Put out to competitive bid. Approved by a full board vote with documentation. $41,000. Compared to the $65,000 per year Sycamore Ridge had been paying Green Valley for the same scope of work. Daniel noticed, in the months that followed, that the entrance landscaping looked the same. The shrubs along the main road looked the same. The common area grass was the same height, the same color, maintained on the same schedule. Everything looked exactly the way it had always looked. Which meant one of two things. Either the new contractor was doing the same work for significantly less money because they were a legitimate operation competing in an actual market. Or the work had never required what Green Valley had been charging to perform it. The strange thing was this. The landscaping company stopped billing the neighborhood immediately after that March evening. Yet somehow, the grass never looked any different.